The mistress laughed in his arms as he whispered that his wife would never find out. But the doors burst open, and his pregnant wife stepped in, staring straight at him. And right beside her stood the man she never divorced. The man who looked that cheating husband in the eyes and said he had no idea who he was stealing from. The celebration froze the moment she entered. Joy drained from Daniel's face like warmth leaving a body in winter. One breath before, he had been smiling triumphantly beside the woman he had chosen to betray his vows with, convinced that secrets were stronger than consequences. He believed his actions existed in darkness, safely out of reach. But then the light shifted. The room fell still, and his entire world was dragged into the open with a single step from the woman he had promised to love. Mara's entrance carried no storm of anger. She did not shout, did not fall apart, did not create a scene. Instead, she held herself with a stillness so cold, so painfully calm, that it made every witness straighten in discomfort. Her hand rested gently on her rounded belly, and her eyes carried a quiet, exhausted strength born from months of sadness no one had ever been. Allowed to see Dot, but what cracked? The air like lightning was the presence of the man standing beside her, Elias. His posture carried the weight of someone who had survived battles far beyond the understanding of anyone in that room. He moved with a slow precision that came from years of discipline, years of danger, and years of learning how to remain unshaken in chaos. Though he wore no uniform, the memory of service clung to his spirit like dust from a long march. Every scar on his body, seen or unseen, whispered a story of sacrifice, resilience, and pain. The guests felt it immediately. This was not some stranger pulled into a quarrel. This was a man who once walked side by side with fear and refused to bow. The truth Mara had carried silently for so long now hovered above every head. She had never divorced this man. Not due to romance rekindled, not due to some hidden affair, but because life had fractured in ways no one had prepared for. Elias had left years ago, serving in a place where days blurred into survival and letters never reached home. Mara had fallen into loneliness, believing the distance meant the end. She had met Daniel during a vulnerable season of her life, when she craved connection the way one craves air after being underwater for too long. Daniel had filled that emptiness with charm, attention, and promises that glowed warm but hollow. Mara had mistaken it for safety, a mistake she now carried like a bruise beneath her ribs. As Mara and Elias stepped deeper into the room, a tide of discomfort swept through the crowd. People who had cheered for Daniel minutes earlier suddenly avoided his gaze. Guests whispered without making a sound, exchanging glances heavy with judgment, confusion, and disbelief. The energy shifted, turning from celebration to confrontation without anyone raising their voice. Daniel's mistress shrank into herself, no longer intoxicated by the thrill of being chosen. Her eyes darted between Daniel and Mara, guilt seeping into her expression. She had not expected consequences to walk through the door tonight, especially not wrapped in such quiet power. Elias said nothing at first. He simply watched Daniel with a stillness that felt sharper than any insult could ever be. His silence was a demand for truth. His presence was a mirror that forced Daniel to see every careless, selfish choice he had made. Mara, standing tall despite the tremble in her heart, exhaled slowly. The years she had survived, the uncertainty, the loneliness, the silent heartbreak rose like smoke behind her eyes. She had come here not for revenge, but for closure, for freedom. Yet Elias's presence made the moment larger than her pain. He stood beside her like a reminder of the strength she once had, the strength she thought she had lost. Daniel finally stepped forward, but his bravado cracked like dry wood. His voice tried to rise, but guilt weighed it down. He faced Mara, but his eyes flickered between her and Elias, trying to understand how the past had returned in such a devastating way. The crowd watched, breathless. No one dared speak. The silence itself became a force in the room. Elias eventually moved closer, not to intimidate, but to steady Mara when her knees suddenly weakened. She had carried heartbreak for so long that releasing it now stirred waves inside her chest. His hand at her elbow was gentle, firm, and full of unspoken understanding. His quiet strength pulled memories from deep inside her. She remembered the smell of his uniforms washed too many times in cheap soap. The night she sat awake counting the days since his last message. The ache of watching the world move on without knowing if he was alive. She remembered the broken look in his eyes when he returned, changed, haunted, still carrying love but unsure how to give it through the weight he bore. Their marriage had not failed from lack of love. It had dissolved under the pressure of war's leftover shadows. And though time had separated them, papers had not. Now standing beside Daniel, a man built from impulse rather than honor. Mara felt the contrast strike her heart like lightning. Daniel tried to speak again, but the words came out thin. Guests shifted uneasily. The mistress looked down, unable to meet Mara's eyes. Elias finally broke the silence with a single steady breath. He did not raise his voice. He did not lash out. His words were simple, but they landed like truth etched in stone. He said that a family cannot survive where loyalty does not live. He added that respect is the one promise that must never be abandoned. His tone carried no judgment, only reality. The room felt his words ripple through it. Even the guests lowered their eyes out of respect. Mara stood straighter, letting the strength in his presence anchor her. Daniel's shoulders sagged. For the first time, the weight of his choices pressed down on him without mercy. The mistress quietly stepped away, her departure unnoticed by most but deeply symbolic to the few who saw. Elias walked forward and paused at a small, velvet box on a nearby table. Daniel had bought it to pretend he was capable of commitment, though he never intended to follow through. Elias looked at it with a calm that cut deeper than anger. He did not touch it. He did not comment. He merely turned away, leaving the symbol of Daniel's false promises lying exposed for everyone to see. The crowd parted instinctively as Elias guided Mara out of the room. People stepped aside not out of fear, but in recognition of quiet strength. Some bowed their heads. Others placed a hand over their heart. Mara, for the first time in months, felt the weight inside her begin to lift. Behind them, Daniel stood alone at the center of a celebration that now felt like a funeral for the life he had taken for granted. The night did not end with shouting. It ended with silence, the kind that teaches lessons too heavy for words. Outside, under the calm glow of streetlights, Mara whispered her relief into the cool air. She knew she was stepping toward a future she could rebuild. Piece by piece, without lies, Elias stood beside her, not claiming ownership, not expecting anything, simply being the quiet shield he had once been. His final words felt like a blessing carved from experience. Strength grows in silence. Healing begins when truth finally breathes. Mara nodded. Her heart steadied. Her future opened, and silently the night carried them forward.